everybody. Welcome to today's webinar about navigating retirement, where our guest speakers are going to be covering everything from your finances to your mental health. Now, my name's Sophie. I'm the marketing manager here at Simpson Financial Services. We're a multi-award winning and independent firm based in Leamington Spa, and we've been helping clients across the UK reach their financial goals for the last 20 years. I'm pleased to introduce you to today's guests. We've got Rob Simpson, our Managing Director and Independent Financial Advisor. Now, Rob has specialised in retirement planning and wealth management for more than 25 years. We've got Michelle Gavin, Partner and Head of Wills, Trusts and Probate at Band Hatton Button, who are a leading law firm based in Coventry. Michelle's got over 22 years of experience as a solicitor dealing with wills and estate planning. And we've got Celia Dodd, author of groundbreaking book, Not Fade Away, How to Thrive in Retirement, which was serialised in the Daily Mail and the Daily Express. Celia examines the psychological and emotional challenges of retirement. So welcome, everybody, and give a little wave. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to take a look at the top 10 anxieties that people tend to experience around retirement. What we're then going to do is jump into the steps that you can take to prepare before you retire, what you can do after you retire, and how you can just ace the transition in general. First up, I'm just going to launch a quick poll, which should pop up on your screen. So if you could please vote for the 3 things that you are most worried about when it comes to your retirement. Bear with me, guys. I'm going to just launch this poll. Okay, so if you could all vote for the 3 things that you are most anxious about when it comes to your retirement, that would be great. Okay, got lots coming in. Money absolutely coming out on top, which is not entirely surprising. Health is up there. Lack of structure, brain health, staying mentally sharp. Lots of people concerned about boredom and having a lack of purpose. I'll give it a few more seconds to fill in, and then I will share the results with you all. Relationship with partner, people are concerned about, but it doesn't seem to be as high up there as money, health, and kind of brain health and boredom, lack of purpose. Okay, so I'm just going to share that with you all. Okay, so it is really interesting to see these results. And obviously, the aim of today is to start covering some of these topics so that you can feel less anxious and feel more in control about the next stage of your life. So with that in mind, I am going to hand you over to Celia.
I spoke to over 60 retired people for my book, and these were the top 10 anxieties that came up. I think it's really interesting that you've obviously money is the big one, but after that, purpose and health, and particularly brain health, I think are big concerns. People do really worry about retirement, which is kind of surprising in a way because it's supposed to be the best time of your life. But it's also it's a leap into the unknown. It's one of the biggest changes that we ever go through in our lives. Work's been such a massive part of life for so long that it's really hard to know how you'll cope without it. And retirement really doesn't have a great image. Think retirement homes. People might look forward to giving up work, but they probably don't look forward to being a retired person. So it's understandable that people don't really want to think about it much until it really hits them. And of course, they're busy at work and they probably don't have time or the headspace to think about it much. But if you can make time to think about it and make plans before you retire, it will really give you a head start. It will put you in control. All the research shows that people who are in control of their retirements, of when they retire, how they retire, and what they do with their time, are the happiest and most fulfilled. So I think it's good to see this list of anxieties as a very useful tool. If you can identify what you're most worried about and then work out how to deal with it, it can kind of preempt it becoming a problem so that it doesn't get in the way of what should be the best time of your life. And of course, I'll be talking about some of these anxieties later on. But now I'm just going to hand over to Rob to talk about your dream retirement.
Thank you, Celia. And yes, good evening, everyone. Oh, what does your dream retirement look like? I think in terms of delivering financial advice over the last 20 odd years, this is probably one of my favorite stages of the advice process, if you were going to call it a process. And people approach this, some people know exactly what they want to do. Maybe they've read Celia's book first and they've discovered what it is they need to do to alleviate some of those anxieties. But quite often people aren't quite sure. It's a brand new chapter in life. And one significant thing, which of course changes, is your lack of potential earned income because you have fully given up work. But when we start to consider with clients what their dream retirement does look like, we kind of initially start to look and we kind of put them down here, potentially 3 areas, and these are the have-tos, the needs. So it may be that you need to fix the roof, you need to fix the house, you need to get a new car. You might have had a company car for 40 years, and that will be a brand new experience going down to the motor dealership. But there are very specific things that you identified that you have to do. And obviously from a financial point of view, which I will touch on later, that includes making sure you've got sufficient income to meet those basic needs, those survival needs. And then looking at things that you want to do, things that you've always wanted to do or enjoyed, as a hobby in your working, during your working life. But quite often we come across things like gift to kids. There's financial advisors trying to tell you to accumulate all this wealth over your working life. You finally come to the end of your working life and you're wanting to give it all away, or maybe not all of it. But gifting is something which crops up quite in quite a number of circumstances. And these things that you want to do are partly to do with the standard of living that you want in retirement. It's not on the slide, but we would also add in the would love to. Oh, I'd love to do this. I've always wanted to do that. And part of what we do, as it mentions in discovery meetings, is try and find out from you what are these things that you have to do, you need to do, and you'd really want to do. Discovery meetings, it's kind of like the second stage in our advice process. The first stage is just an initial consultation to see whether you'd want to work with a firm like ours, and gives us a chance to see if we can help you. But the discovery meetings, this second sort of stage of advice, it's almost a little bit like it's counselling, questioning, I think is a key skill which we bring to the considerations that you have when you're trying to look at your dream retirement. And actually, and I will go on to financial planning in a moment and what a financial plan looks like, but quite often when clients of ours have seen what a financial plan looks like, which they've never seen before in the past, they then want to go back to the discovery stage because they realize that there is capacity to do things which they may not have considered possible before. But certainly when you're in this mode, which I guess most of the people who are attending the webinar today are considering their retirement, it's all these sorts of conversations which you might have with friends and family and peers and people who've already retired as well are a useful source of information. But these decisions which you make now will ultimately determine what your retirement might look like in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, or whenever it is you're looking to retire. So well done for all the youngsters who've attended today and given themselves a really good run at this, because absolutely it's your retirement. It's what you want. It's really useful to have that picture in your mind, so then you can start to work towards it. And certainly over the last years, we've seen many people retire, and I would agree with Celia's comments. The people have thought it through probably most carefully and considered tend to not have the surprises and the anxieties in retirement. So I would say, yes, they've probably aced it. But obviously the last word at the bottom of the slide fills me with dread, but it's a newer phenomenon, and I know Celia is going to have a comment on this. But obviously, if you get things wrong and it doesn't quite work out, then you're into the world of unretirement. So if I can pass over to you, Celia, because I know you've got a few words on this.
Yeah, I mean, unretirement is kind of a bit of a new buzzword. I think a lot of people have started talking about it recently. And the numbers of people working past retirement age, past 65 rather, has doubled to 1.2 million over the past 10 years. But unretirement isn't just about carry on working. It's really about often working part-time or setting up your own new business as part of a portfolio of a whole range of other things that you might be doing, taking a course, volunteering, looking after the grandchildren, whatever. And it's not necessarily about not being able to retire, being able to afford to retire. People, it's not just that people can't afford to retire. It's more that people feel they're not ready to stop work. They feel they've still got a lot to give. And so, they might go part-time for the same company, or as Rob said, they might feel they've made a mistake in giving up, so they go back into a different kind of part-time work. There's a great example of a woman I met who's called the Secret Artist, who she had been a senior executive in a national magazine company. And when she retired, she traveled, and then she got home and was a bit bored and dissatisfied, and her husband said, you need a project. So she got an iPad app. She started painting portraits of people's houses, and it gradually developed into a whole new business. She got this identity on social media as a secret artist, and now it's a very lucrative and but above all fulfilling. So I think unretirement can really work for people, not least because it's a way of gradually easing yourself into retirement. It's not cliff edge. You're not at work one day and retired the next. And I think that can be work really, really well for people. And I'm just going to hand back to Rob about, can you afford it? The key.
Yes, thank you for that, Celia. And in my experience, it's quite one of the I suppose observations I would make is that sometimes people talk about, and absolutely going part-time or reducing hours at work is a very a good way of keeping your sanity and not having that cliff edge. Interestingly, though, I've noticed that when people say, oh, I'm going to probably get a part-time job, and whether it be a driver, if you know anyone who delivers prescription medicine in a van, it's one of the most stressful jobs out there. So pick your new career or part-time role accordingly. Yes, very important. So can you afford it? Interestingly, in the world of spending, and you'll probably see this if you've got parents who are still with us, or passed away and observe their life as they potentially moved through retirement. I mean, the early part of retirement, the early years, if you like, where you're fit, hopefully, and able to enjoy and do all the things that you wanted to do, whether that might be travel, hobbies, new business. Where you need the energy, but the will, and so a lot of the quite often a lot of the expense of retirement can happen in those early formative years. But there will come a time when just naturally you'll be less inclined to do things. For instance, you don't see many people in their mid-80s on aeroplanes, you still see mid-80s on airplanes, but less so. And of course, you then, depending on life expectancy as well, you could find that you're in the realms of needing care. And again, the age demographic of our audience and our speakers today, I think we're probably known as the sandwich generation, in as much as we're looking after potentially parents and obviously have children as well. But parents, especially as their needs for things like care are introduced into their personal circumstances, the cost of care is enormous, or can be enormous. So rather than just seeing, like you may do whilst you're working, a spending pattern of just gradually increasing as inflation makes things more and more expensive, the expenditure curve in retirement can look very different. So we tend to say it looks like a smile, which is very appropriate because it should be a happy time. I keep referring to this financial planning and cash flow modeling, and I've got a really colourful slide on the next screen. We won't go on to it yet, but this is a way in which we as financial advisors, along with you with your personal financial situation and all your plans for retirement, try to work out how best to make it work financially. You might have found that you have accumulated various savings and investments and maybe pensions through work or self-employment, property, all sorts of assets which you might have accumulated. But they might have all been geared up for growth. But obviously, once you retire, your requirement from investments might change, and you're requiring income rather than growth. And again, I mean, you could be in a fortunate position where you've got potentially multiple sources of income for your retirement. Well, where is it best to take the money from, and how? And again, these options that you have with these financial products that you've accumulated over time can be really beneficial to look at. Now, we also mention on here about future capital expenditure. And going back to that needs and wants, very interesting here. Under the need, you might need a car, but you really want to change it every 3 years, for instance, is a good example of a need and a want. So if you're wanting to change it every 3 years, you've got to build into the fact that that's going to be a capital expenditure item in the future. But ultimately, and what we'll look at now is an example of one aspect of a financial plan, which is, it is an example, it's not a real person, this. You can probably consider, if you can read, if you've got great eyesight, one of these, this particular couple's goals was to buy themselves a spaceship at retirement, costing $100,000. It's fictional, of course. But what cash flow modeling allows us to do is to create a timeline. And I would suggest that most of the audience today are in this pre-retirement space, which we color code at the bottom of this very fancy sort of bar graph. We then split retirement into 2 stages of retirement. You would hopefully you'd be enjoying yourself and then later life. But we use something called goals-based financial planning software. And you can see that following a discovery session with these particular example people, we established various goals which they had in terms of income retirements, a worldwide tour. I mentioned a spaceship. There was a pre-retirement goal for a certain level of income. And I'm sure you'll all remember the TV show called Blue Peter. And they used to do fundraising, and it worked like they would refer to it as the Blue Peterometer. And as they took more money in, then the thermostat would fill up until it reached 100%. And that's exactly what we do with our financial planning when someone wants to discuss their retirement plans in the future. And if you're in a situation like this where the majority of your goals are all green and 100%, well, that's perfect. Well, I say it's perfect because it might actually mean that you can do more things in retirement than you thought actually possible. But of course, we get the alternative position where the income that's being generated from all the various potential sources of income doesn't meet anticipated retirement expenditure. And what do you do about it then? And that's the empowering thing about looking or planning your retirement in advance, rather than it be, I've decided to retire next month because January and February have been awful. Because if you do have shortfalls which we've identified, in a financial plan. It gives us time to allow us to give you advice, to make recommendations as to how to fill those shortfalls. So working out if you can afford it, and starting off with going back to those essential expenditures, the needs, the wants, the leisure spends, and then I've always wanted to, the luxury spends, is really important. And certainly, we'll come on to this again in a little bit later, comes down to budgeting and planning. And you'll probably all be a little bit, if anyone's seen the news today, it's been on quite a lot of the news channels, how suddenly you need an extra £8,000 apparently to enjoy your retirement. Well, it depends what your personal circumstances are. If your hobbies are reading, walking, and cycling, you are going to struggle to spend probably sufficient money in retirement. Whereas if your hobbies are motor racing, worldwide tours, then that's going to make it a little bit more challenging, or buy a spaceship. Anyway, there are things which can, personal issues, which we've kind of touched on a bit about, things which could derail your dream retirement. It's very interesting. We've seen a whole raft of them. You know, unexpected things people miss about work. Interestingly, that could be things like colleagues from just purely for social contact. It could be the benefits that their employer provided them. Yeah, free lunches maybe, or company car scheme, or whatever it may be. Touching on that personal health, well-being, and an active mind, I think, you know, some people sometimes do miss that challenging aspect of their employment. One, I wouldn't say it's an unexpected thing which people miss about work, but it is a personal issue which could derail your dream retirement, is redundancy. Quite often that's where, you know, unfortunately the decision's taken away from you. But I can tell you as well, sometimes redundancy can be the best thing that ever happened to you financially from a retirement point of view, if you happen to have planned it right. Relationships is a really interesting one. And I'll give you one of my tips, which I always give to people or couples who are considering retirement, is don't be the first to retire. And this is just in my experience. The first one of a couple who retires is the one who gets the to-do list to fix the things around the house. So negotiate who goes first very carefully. Obviously, it also means that you might be spending, if you're in a relationship, more time together, which is something which could potentially derail retirement, even down to conversations between, oh, well, now we're retired, we only need one car. Well, that's fine if you've always got use of it. And of course, quite a common one, which we see a lot more of, and I don't know whether this will change because childcare cost rules are changing, but quite a lot of people retire to look after their grandchildren for their own kids, so their own kids don't have to bear the enormous expense of having, you know, nursery fees. The financial. Oh,
sorry to interrupt you, Rob. I was just going to say, Celia, it'd be great to know what your kind of thoughts are on this one.
Yeah, unexpected things people miss about work. I certainly, there are people miss the commute. That's a really surprising thing. They miss that space, that mental space. And they also miss having things to do that they don't look forward to. That really, really surprised me. It's not that surprising because actually it's about challenges, isn't it? Everybody needs challenges to feel fulfilled. So yeah, that really surprised me. Challenges are energizing. And I think, again, you know, the things you miss about work can really provide helpful clues as to what you need when you retire. You know, if you need a challenge, there are all kinds of ways to get out of your comfort zone when you've retired. But I think it's really worth thinking about something that has real meaning for you, that it's really worth getting out of your comfort zone for. So yeah, so that, and as for couples, yes, being together 24/7 is can, you know, be quite a surprise and a shock after, you know, all that time just seeing each other at the weekend and in the evenings. And as Rob said, you know, I think it's important to decide, you know, whether you're going to retire together or separately. Silver divorce is on the rise. It's increased by 1/3 over the past 10 years. And a marital therapist I spoke to said that affairs are very common in the first 18 months after retirement, if people haven't really thought enough about the impact giving up work will have, you know, on their identity. But it's the transition that's difficult, not, you know, in the long run, all the research shows that marriages actually improve. So there are lots of, you know, I've got lots of tips in my book. Perhaps there's not time now to go into them. But I think the main thing is not to make assumptions about what your partner expects to do in retirement. You may want to do different things. So it's really helpful to, a simple exercise is just, you know, separately make your own list of things you want to do, big things, little things, and then compare notes and check in with each other regularly. If you can start talking about retirement together as soon as you start thinking about it, you know, before you retire, it's really, really helpful. And it's good to carry on talking about it once you are retired. I know a couple who checked into a hotel for a whole weekend to talk about their retirement because they really disagreed fundamentally about, she wanted to live in the Lake District, he wanted to live in Bristol. And so they sort of hammered out all their differences and they carried on doing it once a year, and it's really worked well. So yeah, I think finally you really need to aim for a balance of things to do together and things to do separately, because you really need independence as well as togetherness. And I think Rob, we talked about financial anxiety, but I think you're going to talk about if you can't afford it now, is it? Or...
If we can just go back one before I hand over to Michelle, just on the financial anxieties, absolutely, there is some, we will touch on that later, but just really I mean, the big unknown, which often causes financial anxiety, and if you knew this, well, my job would just be maths, it would be really simple, is how long are you going to live for? So when you've got money, it's kind of like, well, I'd love to spend it, but what if I need it later? But obviously later I mean, there's financial anxieties of you know, passing away prematurely, but also living too long is a risk as well financially. You'll be pleased to know that to try and alleviate some of the financial anxieties that you may have, we do have a range of educational videos on some of the very focused aspects of retirement, and that primarily are to do with things like pensions and pension funds and options. But it's worth starting to educate yourself on the end game of things like investments and turning them into income. So if you feel there's an area which you're lacking in knowledge and want some help, then please let us know, and we'll be able to send you links to those videos or fact sheets, or invite you to further webinars like this. And now, of course, having planned your retirement and you've got your dream retirement, you've got your finances in order, you've got one last thing to get done in terms of housekeeping, or two potentially. So over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Rob. Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you for the next 10 minutes or so about the importance of making a will and also putting in place a lasting power of attorney. I've got control of the slides, so let's hope this goes well. So why should you make a will? Well, it's so that you decide who handles your money and affairs. So you're going to appoint executors, so that you decide who inherits and who doesn't inherit your hard-earned wealth. And I'll come back to who doesn't inherit, so that you decide who looks after your children, and that's guardians. So a will helps your loved one to carry out your wishes. So that could be funeral wishes, that could be who gets your Rolex watch. So a will can also help to avoid significant legal challenges, and I will come back to that. Dying without a will can mean that your loved ones are left with a financial and emotional mess to deal with. And I'll touch on that again shortly. So putting a will in place is one of the most important ways to help safeguard your future and that of your loved ones. It's time to stop putting off making your will. So why haven't people made a will? Why haven't you made a will? Well, people say it's on their list of things to do. They say I'm too young. They say I don't have enough to leave in a will. They might be worried about the cost of making a will. They might have all sorts of assumptions that everything's going to go to their spouse, their partner, or their children, but will it? And the biggest reason people haven't made a will is because they avoid thinking about death, as it's difficult and complicated. So what is a will? So a will's a document that sets out somebody's wishes about what they want to happen to their assets and cash on their death, okay? When we talk about estate planning, every estate plan starts with a will, but estate planning is about the bigger picture. So that's maybe looking at your exposure to inheritance tax and looking at ways that you can either restructure your assets or gift your assets during lifetime to reduce your liability. It might even mean restructuring assets to make them more income tax efficient in retirement. So assets that would pass in accordance with the terms of your will, what might that be? So everybody can put up to £20,000 in an ISA each tax year. And you can have premium bonds of up to £50,000. And they, for income tax reasons, have to be in an individual's name. As far as I'm aware, cars can only go in one person's name, and they're all the sorts of things that are going to pass in accordance with the terms of your will. Or if there is no will, I'll come on to that. Now, things that don't necessarily pass in under your will might be jointly owned assets or a joint bank account. They might pass to the surviving co-owner rather than under the control and direction of your will. If you're a beneficiary of a property that is owned by a trust, you might not be able to redirect what happens to that on your death. Pensions come with their own rule book, and you will have completed, or you should have completed, a nomination or an expression of wish form to say what happens to the pension pot if anything happens to you. If you're still working and you've got a death in service benefit, that normally is 2-3 times your salary, sometimes more than that. And that pays outside the terms of your will. And it's important that you've completed a nomination form for that as well. Life policies, this is always a bit of a grey area with people. Life policies can be written in trust. They can be written in favour of the mortgage company. They could be written in favour of a spouse or partner or children. But you need to know where that money is paying on your death. So what happens if you don't have a will? Well, the rules of intestacy are going to apply. And on screen, you'll see a flowchart. Now, you probably won't be able to see that clearly. But if I explain at the top, it says, are you married? And down the left-hand side, it says yes. And it says where there's a spouse. And on the right-hand side, it's rank categories of people, of blood relatives who would inherit if somebody died without making a will. And if there were no relatives, and we've gone through all the rank categories, then it goes to the crown you'll see at the bottom. Now, if you are married and you've got children and a spouse has got significant wealth in their sole name, and there are children, then the surviving spouse could well be sharing the assets with the children. And if it is significant wealth, that could also trigger inheritance tax. Now, that would trigger inheritance tax on first death and second death, and most people don't want to pay it on second death, let alone triggering it on first and second death. Making a will could help fix that. So making a will is about who you want to benefit, but what about if there are people in your world you wouldn't want to benefit? What if you're estranged from a family member? We are seeing a huge increase in the numbers of people whereby someone has died and they're coming forward hoping that they were going to get some sort of inheritance from that person's, the person that's died's estate. So we might refer to them as the disappointed beneficiary. So who can make a claim against your estate? Who do you need to watch out for? Well, there's a piece of legislation called the Inheritance Provision for Family and Dependents Act that sets out that certain categories of people can make a claim against your estate potentially if you make no provision for them or you make no reasonable provision for them. And the categories of people that could make a claim are spouse that you are not divorced from. It could be children. You could be cohabiting with someone for 2 years or more, and they could bring a claim if a reasonable provision hadn't been made for them. And if you maintain somebody. So maintenance is quite wide, and I think it catches people out. So, for example, you own more than one property, and you let somebody live in a property in rent-free occupation, and then you die and this occupant is now expected to vacate the property having lived for years rent-free. Well, they could bring a claim against your estate. So if you are worried about a claim against your estate, what can you do? Well, at the same time as writing your will, you would write what we call a statement of reasons, where you set everything out in your own words, your side of the story. So it might be that there's bad blood there, you haven't spoken for 20 years, they haven't bothered with you, you loaned them money, they didn't repay it, they stole money from you, or you've given them an advance on their inheritance. So you have a voice from a grave, for want of a better word, in your phrase. So in your words, you say why you don't want them to inherit. Oh, gone backwards now. Right, so you've made a will. How often do you need to review it? Well, as a rule of thumb, 5 years. But if there are significant changes in your will, then we'd encourage you to come back to the drawing board and relook at things. So if you marry, then that would automatically revoke your will unless there's a clause in the will. If there are birth in the family, more children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, changes in personal relationships, financial circumstances, health, tax laws, they're all the things that are going to bring you back to the drawing board. So it's not just about making a will, it's also important to put in place a lasting power of attorney. So a lasting power of attorney allows you to appoint person or persons that you trust 150% to be able to look after your affairs in the event that either you're not able to or you want them to. So you're not able to, this is all the horrible things in life, such as stroke, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, such as you're hit by the number 13 bus. Or it could be the mind is strong and the body is weak and you need help and you need someone to help sort things out for you. Now, there are 2 types of lasting power of attorney. One is for property and financial affairs, so it's the money one. And the other one is health and welfare. So that's personal and medical decisions, including the giving and or refusing of life-sustaining treatment. So both equally as important. So again, if you didn't have a lasting power of attorney in place, what happens? Well, your loved ones would have to step up and apply for a deputyship order to the Court of Protection. Now, this can take between 6 and 12 months. It's expensive, it's long-winded, there are ongoing hurdles and reports to do on an annual basis. And probably the most important thing is you have no control as to who steps up to act as deputy and take control of everything. It might be someone you wouldn't want to act in that role. So when's the best time to do a will, power of attorney? Well, now's the best time. You just do not know what's around the corner. I think Formula One racing driver Michael Schumacher, he's a classic example of this. He 10 years ago had a skiing accident, hit his head, and his life and the life of his family has not been the same since. So how can we help? So we can help you with making a will. We can talk to you about asset protection, trust options in your will. We can talk to you about estate planning in conjunction with a financial planner. We can talk to you about excluding beneficiaries, what's the best approach for you, and of course putting a lasting power of attorney in place and planning for incapacity. So essentially, it's all about getting your affairs into good order for retirement and beyond. And I'll pass on to Rob. Thank you, Sophie.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. That was super. So what if you can't afford it? So, wow. Well, let's say that you've worked out your essential and your leisure and your luxury expenses. And by the way, we have a fantastic retirement budget planner, which you can request if you put a comment in the chat or send us a request. So you've worked out what your current expenditure is. You've worked out then what your retirement expenditure is going to be based on your dream retirement, and it doesn't add up. And what if is very appropriate here. So based on one set of circumstances that you hope you're going to attain in terms of your retirement plan, you're then forced to look at, well, what could you do differently? So what if scenarios? And again, we use this is our fun, we use our financial planning software to model different scenarios to see what the implications are. And so the sorts of things might be, as we touched on earlier, working part-time in retirement is something which we see, and sometimes it works and sometimes not so, with a range of roles that are available out there. Of course, you've got things like, for instance, how tax efficient is your current withdrawal strategy from your various sources of potential income, whether these are ISAs that you've built up or personal pensions, workplace pensions, final salary schemes, investment property, so many. But certainly working and whether that be a reduction of your current working hours to bridge that gap can be quite useful if it isn't affordable. It might be something that you don't want to do. So we've seen people take steps such as downsizing. You have to be careful with downsizing because there is a lot of expense in moving house. And this would be selling your current home, assuming you own a home, and moving into somewhere less expensive. Quite often we see that downsizing leads to a property of equivalent or higher value. It's an interesting one, but certainly an option. We have even had instances, and again, this would be dependent on personal circumstances, where people have decided to stay and draw value out of their home using products like equity release. But as I say, that would be a personal recommendation. You can take more investment risk, grow the money faster, take more income out. I mean, imagine if you had, I don't know, £100,000 in cash and you wanted to draw 10% of it out each year, but you're only earning maybe 4% interest. That fund is going to gradually run out. So if you look at alternatives, and if you have the appetite for investment risk, we do a psychometric investment risk analysis. And if anyone would like to do one of those, we normally would do one of those in your free initial consultation, which I know we mentioned at the end. But this will there's no right or wrong answers. You just respond to statements and we score your responses. And it gives us an indication as a starting point whether you do have any appetite to invest in things other than cash. Deferring retirement is an interesting one. Again, we model this quite occasionally. What would my finances look like if I worked an extra year? Could I then do all the things I want to do? And included in that sometimes is things like deferring the state pension. If you defer taking your state pension when it's due, in 12 months' time, they will increase, because you haven't been paid it, your state pension by 5.8% currently. Not sure whether that's necessarily a good thing to do if you can't afford to retire. But if you are working past that sort of nominated state pension age, bearing in mind that has an impact. So does things like in the world of buying an annuity. The older you get, the more money the more income you receive from the sum of money that you invest in an annuity. Obviously, that's because the annuity company is paying that income for the rest of your life, knows that however long you live for, it'll be 1 year less that they'll be having to pay out than it would have been had you bought an annuity a year before. Reconsidering retirement goals in some ways, this is a really interesting area here. I have had discovery meetings where what people have wanted to do in retirement wasn't even affordable while they were working. But sometimes it might be, well, what happens if I gift less? What happens if I don't, I reduce my holiday budget, some of that leisure expenditure slightly? What impact does that have in the short, medium and long term? And of course, on the software which we use to produce your plans, you get to see that in pictures and numbers. And if you like pictures, which I do, I work with numbers all day long, but I really enjoy being able to visually see somebody's short, medium and long-term financial plans. And of course, you've got the opportunity, if you can't afford retirement, depending on how soon you've started your planning for it, is to look at your existing investments, whether they be ISAs, pensions. Are you getting the best interest rate on your cash? Are you making your cash work hard as possible? That workplace pension you're in, what fund is it invested in? You probably even know the choice, you just joined it automatically on day one. Have you got disposable income available now whilst you're working so you can start to save more? And if you can save more, well, what do you save in? Do you save in cash, in an ISA, in property, in something else, in a pension? Lots of different things that you could consider there to do, and obviously to probably always seek advice. And on that subject of seeking advice, and definitely if you think you've got a shortfall, if you're on the internet and you are searching for, please find me a bank account which pays me 10% cash, and one pops up in Google that does, well, the old adage, if it's probably too good to be true, it probably is very relevant. And there is so many scams out there. We report scams to our regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, weekly. People ask us, clients, is this good? And it's just not. So certainly watch out for any investment scams. So there are a few things you can do if you can't afford it, some more favourable than others, but just make sure that you consider your options carefully.
So yeah, I was just going to say a bit about your new identity, changing back to the kind of psychological side of the whole thing. Yeah, retirement has a huge impact on your identity. It involves one of the biggest shifts of identity that we ever go through in our lives, because work obviously is a big part of who you are. It gives us agency. And I've come across a lot of people who feel totally lost without work. They feel their opinion doesn't matter anymore. They're not a player anymore. And confidence and self-esteem can go downhill very quickly. And people can get, quite depressed. Status does matter. A lot of people, you hear people say, oh, status doesn't matter to me. I don't care about that. But I'm afraid, it does matter. And of course, it particularly matters to people who are in senior roles. And it doesn't help that, as I said before, being retired has such a bad image, very old-fashioned and out of date. It's associated much more with aging and being passive than it should be. Retirement isn't about aging, it's about changing, it's about negotiating change successfully. And I think that's a really important message when it comes to identity. So my key tips for, adjusting, there's one question that retired people really dread, and that's, oh, what do you do at parties? And the solution is to have a really good answer up your sleeve. So never say, oh, I used to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. Say what you are doing. Say, I'm doing a photography course, or I'm volunteering at Bike Works, or I'm planning a road trip across America, whatever you are doing. It's really about seeing retirement as an opportunity to create a new identity beyond work, to find new things that define you, to rediscover the you that might have got a bit lost behind your work persona. And it's about finding confidence and self-esteem in new activities. Confidence is catching. If you feel good in one area of your life, it spills over into other areas. And I think it's worth saying that retirement is a unique opportunity to be the real you, if you like, perhaps for the first time in your life. There's a wonderful book about the top 5 regrets of the dying, which is actually very inspiring. And one of the top 5 regrets is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life truer to myself. Well, retirement really is your chance. And also health, another big retirement anxiety, as we found out in the poll at the beginning, particularly brain health. It's very natural to worry about losing your mental sharpness when you stop work. But the good news is that if you take care of your body, your brain will look after itself, really. So although we're always hearing about new things that are supposed to help, whether it's Sudoku or goji berries or blueberries or whatever, the research, the most consistent research points to the best way to keeping your brain healthy is physical exercise. And even if you take it up later in life, it still can really have a big impact on your brain. There are 2 kinds of exercise that are really effective. One is aerobic, we're all familiar with, running, swimming, cycling, and the other is muscle strengthening, hill walking, climbing stairs, lifting weights, dancing, push-ups. Each of those kinds of exercise target different kinds of brain function. The other great thing is, when you're retired, you've got more time to pay attention to your health. You've got more time to choose exercise that you really, really enjoy, to kind of explore a few different things. And you've got time to pay attention to your diet. You don't have to get a Pret sandwich at your desk every day. You don't have to drink endless cups of coffee and reach for the wine at the end of a stressful day. But as well as exercise, there's one other thing. I think really just keep using your brain. Find activities that use it. So stay curious, keep learning, take a course in something you're really interested in. Take on an activity that involves learning new skills. Play a musical instrument. There was some research published last month that shows how music can have a big impact on brain health. But above all, do something you really enjoy. If you don't want to play an instrument, that's fine. Just find something that you really enjoy, that stimulates you. And if you don't know where to start, just start with something that you used to be interested in, because one thing always leads to another. And I think it's handing over to Rob now.
Yes, just as we're coming to the conclusion, just really to remind everyone, and this is whether it's finances or wills, actually, just to make sure you do review them regularly. We would say as a minimum every 5 years. And if you've made a budget and it's written down and it's gone on 5 years, it's great to do another one. See how well you've stuck to it, or see how much things have increased. Very relevant now with cost of living increase. And it actually gives you the ability to then maybe shop around and reduce those expenses, or if it was with regards to your will, circumstances change as well. Might have fallen back in love with that long lost son of yours who you lent money and never paid you back. I'm not speaking from personal experience there, by the way. There's law changes as well. I mean, just very recently, I mean, we've seen state pension age change. So my state, well, anyone born after April 1970 has a state pension age of 68. Currently, people are retiring around about 67. There's new data out there from the government which suggests that this could change to age 71. So if you hadn't factored that in and that comes to pass, well, you'll need to factor it in at some point, because the state pension's worth about 10,000 a year. And if suddenly you're not going to get that for 3 years, you've suddenly got a £30,000 shortfall to fill. There's a budget at every year. Well, budget every year and an autumn statement. There's always changes to personal finances, always changes to pensions. Another one to mention, which might affect you, is just the early act, when you can actually draw money from a pension scheme. It used to be 50. In fact, it used to be 30 for professional sports people, but then that both changed and now it's age 55, and there is probably plans to change that to 57. So you have to work out or ask us if that's going to affect you based on when you were born. And obviously personal changes could be anything. Inheritances that you receive, which means a change possibly of the income strategy that you were having in retirement. Family issues, people passing away, no longer able to play football anymore. So you don't need to fund the football boot purchase at the start of every season. And of course, I think having some adaptability and flexibility in your retirement plans, especially as you've never retired before, is very advantageous. So please make sure you review the plans regularly. Thank you. And then just as a final point for me, and I know we're timescale wise very close. So later life care, this might be relevant to the audience in regards to their own parents rather than themselves at the moment. But you do have to identify whether you're a self-funder or not at the point of needing care. You might have to consider where you want to end up. There's a whole range of care homes, from things which look like palaces to things which don't. You can't insure yourself about with regards to going into a care home, but you can actually make an investment, give your money to an annuity company who will and say, well, I'm going into a care home. It costs £50,000. Will you cover it for the rest of my life? And if so, how much will it cost me now? It's an interesting sort of quandary about trying to preserve the estate for the next generation, and obviously providing the best possible care for yourself or for an elderly relative if you're responsible for them. And obviously a little top tip there, an unashamedable promotion of a colleague of mine, Michael Hynett, who's a chartered financial planner. Michael's also a member of the Society of Later Life Advisors, and he advises as an expert specifically in this area. So it probably isn't a concern for you personally immediately, but it might be for in the future, or for a relative who you're looking after now. Thank you. And just back to Celia now.
Oh, Celia, you're just on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. So I'm going to whiz through a few tips. Be proactive. People think retirement is a passive phase, pipe and slippers and all that, but it really is not. It's down to you to make it work, and you may well have to be more proactive than you ever were at work. Find new purpose. If you can sort this out, everything else falls into place. There's a great Japanese study that found that men with a greater sense of purpose were less likely to die of stroke or heart disease. And it's good for everything. It structures your time, it's energizing, it's good for relationships. Focus on the future, not on what you're leaving behind. Of course, when you're retiring, you tend to think about, that you won't have to set the alarm and you won't have to have that meeting, that long meeting every week. But it's really important to focus on the future, to shift focus so that you've got stuff to look forward to, so that it's a departure with a destination, a fabulous destination. So have some things lined up to look forward to. build bridges between the old life and the new. If you can start activities before you retire that you're going to carry on into the future, that really provides continuity and stability. It could be anything: join a club, join a class, start a new hobby. It really builds resilience that you need to get through any major transition. Create structure to your week with 1 or 2 commitments, but not too many. A common mistake is that people cram their diary when they retire, but that means they don't have time to do anything properly. And of course, one of the great luxuries of retirement is that you should have time to do things properly. And I think back to adaptability, as Rob was saying, your retirement could last 30 years. That's a third of your life. And if you look back at the last 30 years of your life, you can see how many changes it's gone through. Your life could well change again. And it's really good to be adaptable in all kinds of ways, and to be flexible and to respond to new circumstances. And just a word about my book. I really hope it can help people because there's no one size fits all, and it's full of sort of examples of people who have retired. I think it's a really good way, hearing about what went wrong for people as well as what went right, to work out what can work well for you, because it really is a very individual business. And of course, it's full of tips and advice from psychologists and experts in the field.